I was driving back from a training day in Exeter, the sort of dull corporate thing that leaves you fed, but somehow hollow, and the rain had started before I even reached the A30. You know that soft, persistent rain that seems gentle until you realize your wipers have been going for an hour and your shoulders ache from hunching forward? It was late, closer to midnight than I liked, and I'd chosen the back roads across the moor to shave off 20 minutes. I told myself I preferred it. Fewer lorries, fewer speed cameras, fewer reasons to stop. Out there the hedgerows leaning like old neighbors, and the tarmac ribbons through the dark, as if it's not entirely sure where it's going. By the time I passed the last village, a pub with its sign clacking in the wind, a butcher's with the blinds down, I realized I hadn't filled up. The fuel light blinked on in that unhelpful amber, a little pulse in the corner of my vision. I felt the first pinch of quiet panic then. Not much, not even fear exactly, just a small pressure in the chest, like a memory of fear. It was raining harder. The road narrowed. I kept telling myself there'd be a petrol station. There had to be one. I was sure I'd seen one out here before. But the hedges grew taller and the verges slick with mud, and when a pair of eyes flared blue in the headlamps, a fox, then nothing. The quiet inside the car deepened into something that made me turn the radio off, as if sound might crack it. When I found the station, it looked like a stage set someone had given up on. 2 pumps under a low-tin awning, a yellow strip light buzzing like a trapped insect, the forecourt shining with that pearly sheen petrol leaves on puddles. No other cars, of course. The little shop had a poster in the window for a firework night years out of date, and a handwritten sign, "Bell for service." My breath smoked the air when I stepped out. The rain had a fine, misting quality that found its way through the seams of my coat. I kept glancing at the road, the hedges, the darkness between trees. It felt like there was a shape crouched just beyond the light, not watching exactly, more waiting. I filled the tank with the sort of urgency that makes you clumsy, the nozzle knocking against the filler cap. When the pump finally clicked, the sound was too loud, too definite. I made myself walk, not run, to the shop. The bell over the door gave a tired jangle. Inside smelt of damp cardboard and bleach. A small TV on a shelf played the late weather with the volume off. I watched the presenter gesture at a cartoon swirl of rain that had already arrived. For a long moment no one came. Then a man appeared from behind the beaded curtain at the back, the beads clacking together like teeth. He had the look of someone who smoked behind the shop, gray around the edges, eyes that moved before his head did. "Evening," he said, like the word itself was damp. "Hi. Pump 2. Full." He rubbed at his jaw. "Quiet out. You're not from round here. Just passing through." He nodded. I realized I was holding my card too tightly. When I set it down, I noticed my hands were shaking a little. Exhaustion, I told myself. The man's gaze flicked to the window, and then back to me in a way that felt choreographed. "Roads flooded further on," he said, casual as asking if I wanted a bag. "Low bit by the pines. Best take the lane past Little Withy. Comes out near the old chapel. Bit longer, but you'll keep your axles." I don't have a sat-nav for that. I tried to laugh. It made no sound. "Any chance you could draw it?" He took a pen, sketched on the back of a receipt. A stylized curve, a perpendicular line, a dot. The handwriting of a man who'd left school young. "You'll know the chapel when you see it," he said. "Can't miss it." I nodded like people nod when they're relieved they have a plan. He rang the sail through. The machine spat out a paper slip. "Last bit of advice," he added. "Don't stop if someone waves you down. Not tonight." "Why?" It came out sharper than I meant. Why tonight?" He waited so long I thought he hadn't heard. "Storm brings things out," he said at last. "People mostly. But other things too, if you believe the old girls. Best be home." I half smiled. Are you warning me about ghosts? He looked at me then, properly, and for a second there was something like pity in it. Just keep moving, he said. You'll be all right if you keep moving. Outside, the rain had softened again, the way it does just before it turns mean. I got in, locked the doors without thinking about it, and pulled away. In the rear-view mirror, the man was already gone, as if he'd stepped back behind the beads and blur with the rows of crisps and newspapers. The road opened its black palm ahead of me. The wipers kept time. I missed the turning to Little Withy first time. The lane was narrower than I'd imagined. Set back and hunched behind a tangle of hawthorn, the sign half swallowed by ivy. I reversed, tires slipping in the silt, and made the turn with the sort of focus that folds the world down to 2 strips of wet tarmac and a little cone of light jittering in front of you. The hedges closed in. Branches ticked on the roof like fingernails. Are you listening somewhere dry? Is it raining where you are? It matters, somehow. It's part of the story. The rain sets a rhythm, and you can measure fear against rhythm. It keeps you honest. The lane rose gently and then dipped into a hollow where the darkness felt thick enough to touch. There were no houses, no farm gates, nothing but the feeling of fields breathing beyond the hedge, the suggestion of sheep huddled under a stand of trees. When I crested the next rise, I saw the chapel. You'd think you couldn't mistake a chapel. This one was the sort of building where it remembers long after people have moved on. Squat, slate roof, doors shrouded in a porch of black timber gone silver with rain. A little yard to one side fenced with rusting rails. Beyond it, darker shapes, the gravestones. Of course, old places make old habits. The hedges fell away there, and the lane widened by a meter, enough for a lay-by if you were generous. My light swung over the graves and found the glisten of water on lichen, the tilt of a cross that had given up on straightness. It wasn't that the place was frightening. It was that it felt occupied, like walking into a quiet room and realizing someone is already sitting in the corner watching you. I was passing it when the figure stepped from under the porch and into the road. I braked harder than I should have. The ABS juddered. I felt the car shiver around me. The figure stood very still, the bonnet almost nudging their knees. A woman, I thought first. Slight, a dark skirt that hung heavy with wet. Then she lifted her hand. I don't know why I put the window down. Habit, perhaps, from kinder nights in kinder places. The air that slapped my face was cold enough to shock. Are you all right? I said, and had the absurd sensation I was talking too loud, as if I might wake someone. She leaned in slightly, but not enough to put her face into the light. The rain drew neat lines off the edge of her hood. "Could you give me a lift?" she asked. The voice was English, but not local. It had that clean, careful sound people get when they've learned to iron the creases out of their vowels. My heart tripped. Every part of me that had been warned not to stop shouted at me then. But the other part, the part that can't quite bear be unkind, lifted its head. "Where are you going?" I asked. She turned her head towards the chapel yard. The movement was small, almost dainty. "Just down the lane," she said. "It's not far. Please, please." It's astonishing, the work that one word can do on a wet night. "Get in," I said, before I decided to say it. She opened the passenger door and slid in without wetting anything she touched, which I noticed and then dismissed because how often do you notice the reverse? She smelled faintly of something that made me think of cold rooms and old paper. She kept her hands folded together in her lap, neat as if she were in church. I pulled away. "What were you doing out there?" I asked, trying for lightness and landing somewhere near strained. "Waiting," she said. "For me?" "For a car." "Do you live near?" "I used to." The rain picked up, a sudden hiss like a pan flung under a tap. The lane seemed to narrow even more, the hedges crowding closer. I had the sensation we were moving slower than we were, as if the car were working harder than it ought to against some invisible incline. "What's your name?" I said, and immediately felt stupid for asking. There are nights when names feel like unnecessary decorations. She said a name then that slid right through my brain, without catching on anything. You know that feeling when you look at a word too long, and it turns into shapes? Like that. I nodded as if I'd understood. "Do you know the way?" I asked. The man at the station said the main road was flooded. "Yes," she said, and reached out one finger to point. Her hand was small and very pale, as if the blood had made other plans. "Left here." The lane to the left was barely a track. I felt the tires hesitate. There was no verge now, just mud and the black mouths of ditches. For a few seconds the rain slackened, and the silence wrapped around the car with such intimacy I felt my skin prickle. Somewhere far off a sheep bleated, thin and complaining. I glanced at her and saw, not her face yet, but the edge of it, the curve of cheek and profile, perfectly still, as if set that way. "Do you often wait there?" I said, and even as I asked it, I wondered who exactly I thought I was talking to. "Only when it rains," she said. "Why when it rains?" "It's easier to hear," she said. "Hear what?" She turned toward me then, and though the light was bad and I kept my eyes mostly on the track, I saw enough. Not damage, not anything you could photograph, just a sense of shape where shape shouldn't be. The feeling you get if someone whispers your name in a voice you remember but can't place. My stomach rolled. I gripped the wheel until the leather squeaked. "The river," she said. "You can hear what remembers." I'd never thought of rivers as remembering things. They always feel like the opposite, like they take what you give them and carry it away and away, down to where nothing stays long enough to have a name. But as we drove, I realized I could hear it even with the windows up, a thread of sound woven to the patter and hiss, the dark, continuous speech of water going about its old work. We were descending. The hedges dropped and opened, and the land widened into a low meadow cut with channels. The track ended in a hall of ruts, and beyond at a bridge, stone-sided and stunted, like the remains of something larger. The water beneath was high, pushing itself under with a slow, muscular insistence. She put her hand on the dash. "Here," she said. "Here, what?" But I'd already stopped. The feeling wasn't fear yet. It was a sharp white taste that comes just before fear, when your body knows a thing your head refuses. My throat had a catch in it, as if I had been crying. I lowered the window a crack, and the river's voice came in, richer, layered. The slap against the abutments, the drag across weed, the occasional grunt as something heavier turned under the surface. I could smell the iron in it, the wet roots, the silt. "When I was a girl," she said, "they told us not to come down here after dark. They said the water took a boy once. It took him, and then it gave him back, and he wasn't right. He'd stand in the yard and listen to the wind and tell its secrets like it was his mother, and he never grew into his own shape again." She paused. The edges of her voice were perfectly smooth. They said it was a story to keep us safe, but we all knew the story wasn't about us. "Why are we here?" I asked. My voice betrayed me with a tremor. "Because you stopped," she said, as if that explained everything. Lightning loosened the clouds somewhere out over moor. No thunder, just a brief, colorless glare. In that scrap of artificial day, I saw the meadow beyond the bridge and a line of pollard willows with their cropped skulls, and then it was gone and the rain returned to being the whole sky. I became aware of my heart then, not in my chest, but in my jaw, my wrists, each beat a soft push against bone. "Will you?" I stopped to swallow. "Do you want me to take you to a house? Somewhere with lights." "There aren't any lights down here," she said. "There haven't been for a long time." Then, in a different tone, like a line learned for someone else's benefit, I'm grateful you came this way. Grateful, I repeated, because sometimes repeating a word changes its shape. It didn't help here. The bridge's low parapet shone. The water shouldered itself under. She turned again, slow, deliberate, and looked at me properly for the first time. I've tried to remember that face 100 times since, and every time I get as far as the idea of it, something fine about the bones, a dignity that made me want to apologize, and then my mind slides away as if I've reached for a hand that isn't there. What I do remember is the sensation that everything in the car had stilled around us. The wipers paused mid-arc. The ticking event stopped ticking. The rain turned to a screensaver, and in that pocket of not quite time, something moved in the back seat. It wasn't big. It didn't make the springs give or anything as obvious as that. It was just a shift in the pressure you feel on your neck when you know another presence is behind you. I didn't turn. I don't know if I could have. "Don't look," she said very quietly. "Please don't look." And because I am the sort of creature who obeys even at the edge of the unreasonable, I didn't. Instead, I sat there with my hands on a wheel and my throat tight, and felt the small temperature of the air change, a coolness like when you open the door to a cellar and the past comes out to greet you. The river sounded louder, closer, the edges of its voice fraying as if it climbed the bank and put its mouth against the glass. I could hear, underneath, something like syllables, not words, not in any language I'd love to admit to, but cadences that suggested the shape words might take if they were dragged backwards through silt. The presence in the back seat leaned, not towards me, towards her. I saw, without turning, the shadow of it gather in the windscreen, a smudge where the night was a little darker than the rest of the night. I felt sweat break in the small of my back, sudden and cold, and the old animal part of me woke with all its bright little teeth. "You're not late," she said, and for a second I thought she was talking to me until I realized the sentence had traveled past me and into the back. "You're right on time." The car's interior light flickered, once. It didn't come on. In the brief tremor of it I saw, or thought I saw, something like a hand reach forward and touch her temple with a familiarity that made my stomach fold on itself. Not tenderness, not cruelty, a recognition of ownership that didn't belong in any decent story. "I should go with him now," she said, and I heard, for the first time, the thing that wasn't flatness in her voice, relief. "Thank you for stopping." "Wait," I said, and had no idea what I meant by it. What are you? "It's easier when it rains," she said again, and then very softly, to back seat. "I'm ready." I hadn't taken my foot off the brake. I remember that detail because later I used it to convince myself I was the sort of person who would remain composed. It's flimsy evidence. The truth is I didn't know where my feet were. The truth is my mouth had gone so dry I could taste dust. The truth is my heart was running so hard it felt like a separate creature in the car, something skittering under the seats. There was a movement then, not noisy, not physical in the way you'd measure, but a sense of weight rearranging itself. If you've ever been in a house and felt someone walk across the floor in a room above you, the way the air registers it before your ears do, that's the closest I can get. She exhaled, just once, as if something had pressed against her chest and then ceased to exist. I did look then, I could not, and the passenger seat was empty. I don't mean empty like she'd opened the door and stepped out. The door was closed. There was rain on the window in continuous, honest lines. There was the imprint of nothing on the seat, but the shape of her absence was so sharp it seemed to hum, the sort of absence that feels like an intention. I turned, finally, with the carefulness of someone moving a cup too full of water. The back seat was back seat, my carry bag on the left, a coat I'd thought I'd lost under it. No shadow doubled something that should have been single, no impression on the upholstery. And yet I knew, with a certainty that still makes my skin tighten, that something was sitting right there, looking past me into the windscreen at the black line of river. "Hello," I said, because I am a fool. The air in the car shifted again, a little rush like the space you get when someone stands up from beside you on a pew. It moved forward. It went through the thin membrane of the windscreen without troubling it and took the cold and a little of the dark with it. The river's voice altered. It shed the sibilance and took on a new, buzzy insistence, the way voices do when they move into another room, and you can't quite make out the words. I felt, more than saw, a shape lower itself to the stone parapet and lean down, as if to drink. I don't know how long I sat there. The wipers started again without my telling them to, and I flinched as if something had shouted. At some point I touched my face and found it wet, and not only from the rain. The tears surprised me. I hadn't thought I was that sort of person either. There's a point in a night like that where what you're afraid of shifts very slightly. At the beginning, it's fear of what might happen. Later, it's fear that nothing ever will, and you'll sit there forever, pinned to your own idling heart. When at last I put the car in gear, the relief felt filthy, like escape in a room where someone is still talking to you. I pulled forward onto the bridge. The tires made that wet-on stone sound that's almost polite. Halfway across, I looked left. I shouldn't have, but people always do in stories, and I am, at worst, a person. There was no one on the parapet. No woman, no shadow not shadow, nothing with hands that touch without touching. But there was a set of finger marks in the tarnish on the stone, as if something had pressed there briefly. They were darker than they should have been in that light. I told myself they were lichen. I told myself a million sensible things. None of them stuck. I drove, not fast, not daring to be fast. The track lifted out of the meadow and found the moor again, and the hedges came back like guards in a corridor. At some point I reached the main road, and when I finally saw another pair of headlights, I had the astonishing urge to pull right into them. I didn't. I followed the white lines. I watched the rain. When I reached the next village, 5 houses and a phone mast and a bench with dedication plaque to someone called Elsie. I stopped. The bench was under a horse chestnut whose leaves made a shiny cave, and for a second the idea of sitting on a bench at 1 a.m. in the rain felt sane. I didn't get out. I sat with the engine off and let the car tick while the heat died. I thought I was alone until something in the wing mirror moved, and I startled so hard my teeth hit. It was only a man with a dog. Only. He wore a wax jacket with that smell people either love or hate, and the dog's lead made a chain sound. Late for a drive, he said through the small space I dared open a window. "I got lost," I said. My voice sounded wrecked in a way I hoped he'd think was flu. "You all right?" "I think so." I didn't ask him to confirm it. He cocked his head at the car, at me, at the rain, calculating some village equation of risk and politeness. "Road's a mess by the river," he said, as if this were news and not the beating heart of the night. "Girl went in there once, you know, long time ago. They say her ma'am still puts flowers by the old chapel on her birthday. People forget, but ma'ams don't, do they? What was her name?" I asked too quick. He squinted. "Might have been Ellie. Or Ellen. Funny thing, everyone has a different version. They used to do ghost walks up at the pub before it changed hands, and every guy told it different. But there was always a girl, and there was always rain." He gave me a look that found a place under my sternum where something raw lived now. "You really all right?" I stopped when someone waved me down. I said, and heard how strange it sounded in my own mouth. I shouldn't have. He nodded slowly, like maybe that matched an old shape he carried. "We all stop," he said. "Once." He moved on, the dog's nails clicking on the wet tarmac, his silhouette dissolving and reappearing under the leaves. I watched him to the corner, and then I put the car back in gear, because what else was there to do? I didn't sleep when I got home. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the rain find new routes down the glass. The radiator clicked as if someone were counting slowly. I around for the wind changed and the rain took on a lighter tone, and I lay down fully dressed and shut my eyes and saw the bridge, the parapet, the water pushing its way under as if no other world existed but its own. When I dozed, I dreamed the river had risen and was pouring across the carpet, but that the sound it made was like someone turning the pages of a book, not in a hurry, and that there were words on those pages I could almost read if I was quick, if I was quiet, if I kept still. In the morning, I did what people do when they've met something they can't hold. I went to work. I drank coffee that tasted like metal and sat in a meeting where a man with good teeth said the word granular too many times, and the fluorescent light made everyone's skin look thin. I could have told myself there and then that I'd been exhausted, that I'd fallen asleep at the wheel for a heartbeat and dreamed a neat little story to fit around the shape of guilt. I could have. I didn't. That evening I looked up the chapel. It wasn't hard. This is a small country, and stories make maps of their own. It had a name that sounded like closing a book. The graveyard had been closed and new burials for decades. The river had flooded badly in 78, again in 96. There were photographs. The chapel in winter with snow piled against the slates. The yard in summer with cow parsley crowding the stones. A black and white of village fate, with a trestle table and a woman slicing a cake under a parasol. In that one, someone had written names underneath in blue biro. Vera, Mr. Griggs, Pauline. The girl beside the cake had no name. I went back the week after. I told myself it was a drive. I took the main road and did not turn off for Little Withy. I told myself I'd go as far as the petrol station, and that would be enough. The station looked smaller in daylight, as if it had been built by children. The poster in the window had curled at the corners. The bell over the door gave its reluctant jangle. A woman served me this time, with a face like a cheerful hill. "Quiet out," I said, to see what the words felt like. "Always is," she said, "except Saturdays. Bloody fisherman." I asked after the man with the gray edges. She looked at me as if I were mixing up two different songs. "Only me here," she said, "and my lad sometimes, when he's not gallivanting." I stood in the forecourt after and let the rain find me. Not heavy, the sort that makes everything smell nearer. I wanted to ask a question I couldn't shape. I wanted to say, when you tell the story, how do you end it? Do you give the girl back? Do you keep her? Do you pretend she was never yours to begin with? I drove on. The hedges were full of late, roses threaded with spider silk. When I reached the chapel, I didn't stop. I couldn't have told you why. Cowardice, most likely, or respect. The lay-by held nothing but tire tracks. The porch was empty. The graveyard was exactly as I had always imagined a graveyard should be, tired, patient, full of polite weather. The river moved under the bridge with the steadiness of something that had never promised anything but here, and then here, and then here. I made it back to the A road, and to the next, and to the place where the city begins without saying its beginning. In a shop window, a TV played the weather with the sound up. A cartoon swirl, a man gesturing at rain. At home, I hung my coat and sat, and for the longest time I did nothing. There are days when the quiet in a room feels like a blanket. This was not that day. This quiet had teeth. So I did what people do who need to fill a quiet with something that isn't a story. I turned on the tap. I stood and listened to water. If you were here beside me, I'd ask you something I'm afraid to say out loud. When you hear rain against your window, do you ever think it's saying your name? Do you ever think there's a cadence to it that matches the rhythm of your bones? Do you ever imagine a voice underneath it, patient and dark, repeating something you once promised and forgot? That night, very late, I dreamt of the back roads again. I was driving across the moor, and the hedges were drawn back like theater curtains, and the lane was a seam stitched through black cloth. The chapel stood where it always stands. The places in our minds don't move just because we do. And there was someone in the porch, not waiting, not waving, just present the way certain truths are present whether you look at them or not. I didn't stop. I kept moving, slow as a thought you can't quite form. And as I passed the lay-by, I felt the backseat shift, the little change in weight, and I woke with the taste of river in my mouth and the certain knowledge that I had promised something to someone and kept it without understanding what it was. I don't drive that way now. I tell myself it's the state of the lanes, the way the hedges grow into your paintwork and the ruts catch your tires. I tell myself it's the fuel economy, the safety, the logic of motorways. Every so often, though, when the weather turns and the gutters learn a new language and the lights on the estate throw soft salt shaker patterns down a brick, I think about that night. I think about the man who told me not to stop and how I stopped anyway. I think about the name that slithered through me and refused to stay. I think about the imprint of fingers and how stone remembers pressure longer than skin does. Sometimes late, very late, the kind of late that has edges, I hear the sound of tires on wet stone. It comes from no direction I can name. It moves through the room and finds a seat beside me and sits very still. I don't turn. I never turn. I sit and listen to rain, and I keep my hands quiet in my lap, neat as if I were in church, and I wait for the moment when the air changes and something beside me stands up and goes to the window and puts its mouth, very gently, to the glass,